Thanks for coming. So my name is Ahmed Makkawy. I have, it's not really an interesting past, but I find it one that really led me to where I am today, so I'll just briefly go through it. I moved to Rochester in 2006, January 2006, to join IBM. I was a software engineer at IBM for 7 years, I believe 7 going on 8 years, and as a software developer. So we were tasked with 2 primary functions. One of which is to build the software. You'd get a directive to code software and build it. And the other 20–30% of the time, we'd be answering the client crises really on a regular basis, and you'd get a phone call or a page or a cell phone ring and be responsible for resolving that issue with them on the phone, whether that included coding it or kind of this crisis management hotline, if you will. So that was through 2013. In the interim, what that really led me to find is I wanted a creative outlet that wasn't really as creative as I didn't really imagine it to be, but needed a creative outlet for myself. So I started a creative agency, or marketing agency at the time, to build websites and just be able to learn about web technologies and that sort of thing along the way. Thereafter, I kind of shorten it, but I've been able to, just out of curiosity really, be a part of advertising agencies, a real estate analytics company based in California, and most recently Mayo Clinic. So what I gained over that time is cross-industry experience in the users, I guess, or the patients, the users in several different industries. And that's what leads me to user experience design. Because in each of these roles, I felt like, for better or worse, we were building products or setting up services, tech, IT, or otherwise, in the startup field that were catered to a certain user group. And either they loved the product or they hated it and were just waiting for the next release to come out when we fixed this problem or that problem, right? So that's kind of where I come to user experience design, and why I find it to be an incredible field, because you're problem solving human needs and addressing stories rather than this piece of code doesn't work, so I'm going to fix the math and make it work. That solves a problem, yes, but maybe not the user where we get to where we are today. So I named, aptly I guess, named the course products and services, who are you designing them for? Because you can build anything and you can hope that a user will use it, but odds are they may not, because you haven't taken their story into consideration. So some of the quick goals, the 3 that I identified is identifying the key players in product service design, maybe going into, I think I'll move this to number 3, but learning about some of the new rapid prototyping tools that are out there, which are for IT and otherwise. Really, I'll show you how you can apply them elsewhere. And then discussing, once you have an idea for a product or service, whether it's in an enterprise setting if you're at IBM or Mayo Clinic, or you have this start one, how you create it, diverge and converge and scale it to the size of product that you can actually build and deliver, right, no matter the industry you're in. Okay, so here's a team, right? So NASCAR group, I guess your pit crew, and this is what everyone imagines their best team looking like or functioning, right? Everyone has their own specific task, and somehow, in a couple seconds, there's new tires, everything's tweaked, and they're back into the race, right? So we all stick to our tasks, and everyone's coordinated, and they know what they are to do, and a task is complete. What I've found is this is the way most of my teams have operated, right? So this is, we were a team, right? We think everyone was there for the progression of the project. Everyone's doing certain things. We don't know what different facial expressions are for. Someone's, excited and she's asleep, and I hope somebody took pictures along the way like that. It seems like most of the teams I've been on, for whatever reason, because we're human, that's the way it kind of falls apart if you don't organize it in such a way that that everybody has a goal, right? Yeah. So, what do we learn from that, or how do we better that? And this is about the team or the group, right, before we get to the product. So this is separating your idea from how you're going to set up a team. If you put everyone in a room, including the stakeholder, in front of a whiteboard, for example, and I draw something like this about the workflow, your team workflow, everyone's present, everyone's taking notes and contributing to the conversation. Here's how our team will work. It plays off really well, especially if this is done project to project basis. And I bring this up now because it's going to play into how you build your idea and your concept, and you find success down the path. So in this concept, this may be your team lead or project manager. He or she will have certain tasks, and they need to step number one, they need to pass along this directive to the team, your research and development team. They need to then pass back your step number two, or I'm going to pass back the report to your VP of finance, whatnot. And you have a list of actions and steps that's clearly defined, right? And this doesn't have to be presented as much as it is collaboratively put together during a meeting. If you were to sit for an afternoon and figure this out, it's high value time in front of a whiteboard with a group just like we have today, or smaller, with your startup team, with your team at work, wherever that may be. And now you've defined goals, and you can act more like the pit crew team than the concert goers. So that being said, I like this. It came out of a first quarter analysis of user experience design. One of the most powerful first steps is to select an upcoming product or service that you really want to dig into. Because it doesn't matter what it is or how large a task it is, just pick something that you want to apply this goal to. And that it's kind of nice that this is a January session, so we all have these goals, these ideas, maybe a business idea or a startup idea that you want to really get at this coming year. Keep it organized from the beginning, and it helps. Okay, so here's a sad story. So I worked at, I mentioned I worked at IBM for years, and part of that, an opportunity I had through that work was going on these trips to install supercomputers. So the Blue Gene, I forget the version it was at that time, the P or Q series. So this is what they look like, right? These large server rooms, racks and racks of computers and processors. So this was a beautiful new building in Saudi Arabia at a research center. And we get there. This was not built out. It was structured. There was construction going on around us. They're building this beautiful building, and we are there to install this system. It's 16 rows of supercomputers. Two major problems with that situation. The doors. So we receive a shipment, and this really wasn't in the job description, but we received the shipment, brought it in from the airport there to install at this location. Each of these systems, if you can imagine, comes in, it's 2,000 pounds or so, and comes in on a pallet, a rolling pallet. What we quickly found out with the very first one, we're excited, this is number 1 of 8 of 16 rows. We get to the door, and the door is not the size that would allow us to pull this into the room. It's a beautiful room, it's ventilated, it's vented correctly, it's well lit and everything, as you can see. the size that would allow us to bring it into the room. So that's a problem. It's a communication issue, right? And probably several other things, you know, engineering-wise, but a communication issue. The other thing I found interesting about this specific building was, and maybe related, there legitimately were not restrooms in this building. This is a building probably the size of the Hilton building here on the Mayo campus. It's a very large building. There were not any restrooms. So that, again, communication, perhaps a communication miss. So if we think back to the team dynamic and maybe the way maybe they sat down and adjusted the timeline and the team dynamic to say, you know, here's the plan for this room or this building. Here are the requirements for this building, right? And what it should include, restrooms being one of them, and then maybe doorways that would allow us fitting this hardware in. That may have been resolved, right? So millions of dollars later, there are restrooms, and we did install it, as you can see here. So that it's just a painful experience, but it goes to show that how important communication is. So lessons learned: define the requirements and adhere to the communication channels that you set up, you know, early on in a project. Okay, the mission now. So here's how we start to transition from your team to your product. Give the whole team, or try to give the whole team, the responsibility of being user-centered, right? So you will have, on a technical team, you will have programmers, you'll have managers and HR and sales and marketing. Usually, because it's a human thing, we said that that's not my job, you know, that's maybe the designer's job or the marketing person or salesperson's job to handle how the user is going to interact with our software. I'm only here to build it or to write it. Or if I'm starting a lawn care company, the same thing applies, right? So you will mow the lawn, I'll handle the accounting, you'll handle the marketing and sales, and that's how it's going to work. If you make it a mission to have everyone on your team, large or small, almost give them the burden of taking on, thinking about the user, then you really get a higher level of engagement, because they start to think of others' needs throughout your process, from beginning to finish. Oops. Sure, might skip there. There we go. Okay. So, especially going into a new year, sometimes for idea-centric people, we have ideas all the time. So I have this idea for a great product or service. I spent all weekend or all night thinking about it. You know, what do I do now, right? And that's you and me both. We have ideas, and that's the way we're wired, and we get excited about them, and we want to act on it and have it shipped, right? Or we just nix it. You know, I think it was a great idea, but you know, maybe next year. So how do you go about that, right? You have two options. This is an interactive presentation. So you can say, I'll design it, right? I'll think about it. I'll design the way it should work. Or, you know, maybe I'll put it off. I'll ask some friends and family, see what they think about it. And if they agree to it, then maybe someday I'll take it on and work on it, right? So let's see how that plays out. If you say I'll design it, oftentimes, and I'd like your opinion too, but more often than not, the outcome is, you know, I created this gadget that does everything because I thought of everything, and I put all the functionality into this product or service. You know, if it's a lawn care service, we do everything. You know, no task too small or too large. We're gonna, you know, we're going to take care of everything. We'll do the landscaping, we'll do the fertilizer and lawn care and snow removal and everything, and it'll be great. If it's a piece of software or a piece of hardware, it's going to be a scanner and a printer and a copier and maybe iron your clothes, you know, while it's at it. So that's more often than not what happens, because we get so excited about what it can do, and we start thinking, well, what would I want it to do? And we have these grandiose ideas. Or if you ask friends and family, there can be a bias there as well. You'll either, they all loved it, or, they have mixed reviews, so you kind of put it on a back shelf because I didn't hear much support for it. Or it wasn't well received, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it's a great idea, and they don't know what they're talking about. So that's kind of the way I normally see it playing out. Do you have experiences like that with products? If you had an idea for software or a product or service where it's kind of gone that route, or am I off base here?
I've had an experience similar to the first one, where I hired subcontracted someone to do some work for me, and his idea was, it's got to be this big, huge, grandiose thing. And I said, no, the customer specifically wants this, and this is what they're willing to pay for. And then he delivered this, and I said, sorry, you're going to get paid for this. You over-delivered, but I can't pay you for that. And he wasn't happy about it, but it's that communication up front. It's like, no, this is what we agreed to. Yes, you over-architected it, and it was great, but it was overkill.
Right.
So it's, that can happen.
Sure. Any others?
I don't know how many products I have on my website that aren't live, that are there, not
Just
being sold.
Ideas that aren't being sold.
They're designed, but we're not selling them.
Is there maybe a reason or?
I think that we have multiple target markets, and we are marketing to one of them really well, and we don't know how to scale our team so that we can continue to serve the target market that's buying in, so that we can market to the two other audiences.
Okay, that makes sense. Kind of that scale issue. Sure. Any others?
I needed a product that didn't exist, so I was the customer to start with. So I just joyfully went along and said, this is what I want, and this is what I need, and this is what will make it just right for me.
Sure. Sure.
And I showed it around, and turns out a lot of people like me.
And others, and that's a success story in itself. As you had a need or a story that you were linked to, and there was a product that you could design and put out to market and see if it works, right? Which is a risk, but can play off pretty well, sales wise. That's good. So here's what I would suggest, I guess. Both of those concepts, the I'll design it or the ask friends and family and kind of see what comes of it, have so much human bias to them. And that's just how we're wired up, right? It's a great idea because I came up with it, or because this is my brother-in-law and he had the idea, so it's awesome, it's the best thing ever. Or we twist our thinking to get on board with an idea for a product or service as well. One of the main tenets, I guess, in my field of work in user experience or patient experience, customer experience, is removing the bias completely, right? Or trying to. You won't be able to dwindle it to zero, but trying to run it down. And here's what that looks like. Here's some of the steps that would be involved in doing so. Instead of the idea being the product or service, you really want to boil down to the story, right? Like what is behind it? You almost read between the lines of everything. If you were to write out all the concept for your product or the next initiative that your team is going to take on, you read between the lines, and there's definitely a story there, a one-liner or a paragraph that explains why this idea came up, why it popped up in your mind, and why you're passionate about it, right? And in doing so, there's often a specific problem that you're trying to solve. You've judged and created a profile of a user or a customer or a patient that could best make use of this product or service. And then oftentimes you can forget number two, which is creating that profile of the user, and then gather the stories, right? So you have a hypothesis of the need and you have a hypothesis of the problem, but then just try to forget it for a second and gather as many stories as you can, which is scary to most because that means going wide, right? But I want to work on my problem. I want to work on my product or service that I thought up of. It's okay to go wide with it and pull in stories, hear what those around you are saying, or gather input from others that you are not related to, for example, and if it's and get diverse with it too. So we were an example of this with the real estate analytics company I was working with called CoreLogic. We're building an online service leasing application. Right, so leasing applications are 15, 20, sometimes 30 pages long, and you're filling in a lot of forms on a printed sheet, and there's maybe and then 3 times on page 3, etc., and it's a long process. And then you're waiting maybe a couple days to get a credit check, that sort of thing. So the concept, and this is enterprise, the concept was, let's make this an electronic form. And what does that look like? Right, so a lot of it came around, yeah, we know that most that may have a tablet or a phone that would be using this, let's say in the 20 to 40-year-old range, that have this many devices and are comfortable with technology enough to take on this this process online and trust the security that would be there because they're entering a social security number, for example. What you have to do is go wide with it, and we're talking to 80-year-olds, we're talking to maybe a 17-year-old, out of high school that may be looking into leasing an apartment, and what are their needs, right? Because if you get the whole picture, then I can zoom back into where I need to be, and you capture the most use. And then number 4 is collect those sound bites. Right, and what that does is it helps you quantify your results. So here's what that looks like. Now, so let's say I talk to 30 people, and you do want to cap it. I'm not usually asking, so if this whole process takes 4 to 6 weeks, for example, and I'll get into what I call discovery and framing session for these, but it can be as short as 2 weeks, and you can condense everything, and it's hectic. Or you can do a 4 to 6 week discovery and framing kind of process to get all of this out. But you come out with, you filter down to personas. And what I mean by personas, if we think of them as cartoon characters, if you will, like you see here, each of them has a different enough story and a background. Their attitudes might be different, or should be different if they're different personas. They have different motivations, and they have pain points, different pain points, right? So in that scenario with leasing an apartment, the 17-year-old out of high school that's looking to lease an apartment is going to be very different. They have different motivations and pain points than the 30-something, software engineer that's been renting, but is just tired of certain contracts or not finding the perfect fit for him or herself, right? So they each have different stories, and it's good to give them names. So in my experience, we've actually given them names, these cartoon characters, names and stories, so that we can go, point back at them at a later stage in the project when we start looking like the concert goers, that we saw, and everybody's forgotten why they're there, and they're just kind of moving on with the project. You can point back and say, well, Charlie, I don't know why Charlie Sheen came up. I'm like, well, Charlie Sheen, he's the 50-something, the party goer that likes to do this and has, expendable income, and this is why we're building this functionality in, right? Him. Or Jill is our 18-year-old straight out of high school or in college that has this set income and does not have a lot of time. She has 2 or 3 jobs, for example, does not have a lot of time to log into a leasing application. And this is her story. This is her pain point. And so we've taken 20 or 30 stories and we've whittled them down to, let's say, 4 or 5 personas, these characters. And that way it's easy to go back to them instead of digging through, notes that you have from a user interview. And then it helps you along this path, which is you're going from a scenario to a goal, right? The scenario is you have a user that is running through a process or is using your product or your service, and to achieve a certain goal, which gets at that pain point, right? With the leasing application, they've successfully and easily filled out their leasing application, and they can track it, and it no longer becomes a pain point for them. Any questions so far on the persona building?
So it's okay to have like 5?
Yeah. 5 is actually, that's a perfect, no, it's a perfect number. Actually, 5 to 8, 5 is better. Yeah.
We were hired by someone that was our persona, like down to the name.
Mhm.
It was really weird. Like, everything.
The person.
It was crazy.
And you'll, yeah, oftentimes you'll have that, especially if they have a story that resound, you know, that some stories are just louder than others because they speak, you know, they're like, we're building this for you. Like,
Yeah.
this is, you are the person we're building this for. But hopefully that the personas, I mean, they match, and that's why you talk to more people, because then you can ensure that, you know, Bill here applies to, let's say, 6 of your 30 people that you talk to, right? That's why him or her, you know, would stand out as a character, because we've seen, you know, so many we talk to are starting to fit the same picture, so they should be a persona that we have. So yes.
What would you tend to put in the attitudes category? Some examples.
Attitudes would be primarily, so they're not as concrete, but it's more so personality driven rather than functionality. So an attitude is, I'm trying to think of an example.
Would like an outdoor enthusiast or an environmentalist have attitudes about
About exactly
treat the product, or
right. So the attitude would be more emotion based. Their attitude on with submitting their social security number into a form on the website. Their attitude towards that is, I usually shy away from doing that. Whereas Bill or Nancy, one of our other ones, is, I'm fine with it. I do, you know, I've used that information on Amazon and this other thing and a credit check, so I'm perfectly fine. Their attitude might be, I'm very comfortable pushing that information through. Yep. Any others? All right. So here are some examples where that's come into play, and these are just me kind of sharing some stories on how this gets put together. So this is the one we just talked about, actually with CoreLogic. So coming up with, our team got together, the stakeholders and everyone got together, and we drew out, here's how our team is going to work, right? And then we did a series over the course of a couple of weeks. We did user interviews, and we talked to a whole bunch of people about filling out their experience, filling out leasing applications. And then we filled out, because it's an IT kind of based project, we filled out all the information that I need to fill out on a paper form to lease an apartment. And we came up with 113 different data fields that were needed across these 18 pages or whatever. I think there were 113 different data fields that needed to be filled out to be deemed, you know, acceptable to run a credit check or a criminal check, background check, right? And then you notice, so to get a credit check, let's say 62 of those were used to run the credit check and 70 some were going to run the background check. You have a bottleneck then. So I have to run through, and when we started to switch this into screens, right, you have a lot less real estate here than you do on a paper, on an 8.5 by 11, right? And so that becomes the next step. And it's a really fun process because it gets you to think about things differently, right? Now that I'm dealing with scrolling, how much scrolling am I willing to do? Is this going to be, are these 113 fields going to be on one form that I'm going to scroll through, and then maybe you know, my brother calls and now I've lost my place in the thing, or the browser is down, and do I save that information? Is it sensitive information? Do I need to show you a privacy policy, you know, with the attitudes on the social security number? Do I need to tell you, is it important enough to tell you how I'm going to use that information, or if I will or won't save that on our end? That all becomes part of the experience. And that's what gets missed a lot of times in developing a product or service. We think about not always the emotions around it, how comfortable a customer or a patient is going to be with the product that you're giving them, and what they get excited about. I mean, really, to form a habit of using something like this, you have to get them excited, not only comfortable with using it, an app or a product, but you want them to buy a service plan, or keep, the next time you push a release out, you want him or her to be excited about using your product, and not view them all the same. The next app that comes out that has the same functionality, oh, I'll try that one. No, you really want that emotional investment, and I love using this app or this planner, or coming into the Mayo Clinic, I mean, it's across the board. Another place we saw this is, so as part of an ad agency I worked with in the cities, we worked with Starwood Starwood Preferred Guest Hotels. It's a group of hotels. A nice thing they did is SPG rewards as a way to accrue points. Every time you stay at a hotel and you get rewards, you can spend them different ways. And one of the experiences we worked on is, once a quarter or at the end of the year, we wanted a fun way to show them, you're very quick to delete emails, and they were very aware of that, right? If you get an email from the hotel, what kind of importance could it be if I'm not staying there or don't plan to stay there in another month or two? So they wanted a fun experience to show you how many points you've accrued, and then how you could use those points, because they found that points would go unused and just deleted or dropped out of the system, or people would have no idea and end up calling in, taking up a representative, asking, how do I use your points? Or I went to the website, I couldn't figure it out. So one neat thing we built into an email was, it was called a slice of SPG life, or something to that effect, where in the email itself was a link, a custom link to the way you used or accrued points that calendar year, and what you specifically might be interested in using them for in the upcoming year. So it's a really neat challenge to say, what does that experience look like? Right? So you have a bunch of points, person A and person B both have 100,000 points, but they've accrued them in different ways or at different hotels. Maybe they spent them on an event, because you could auction, you could put in a bid to use it at to go see I don't know, the Vikings play, or you could go to a concert for 25,000 points, that sort of thing. And so you gain, in this day and age, we've gained enough information, customer information and whatnot, to be able to do really fun things with it that we haven't been able to before. Because if you design your product or service to use the information in a way that retains customers, then it can be a lot more engaging for them as well. So that was kind of a fun concept. The third that I wanted to bring up is, we worked on a fitness and sleep tracking band for a local startup here in Rochester. And this was really the first time that I got into product design. So this physical, fitness tracker, sleep tracker, similar to a Fitbit, but in this case primarily for teams, for sports teams and for the military, entire units. What does it look like to see the information for the whole team, right? And what are some of the challenges that they face? So one interesting thing is, for NFL pro teams or the NHL, they would find that on, let's say they won a game and they want to go party, right? They would take the band off, and because it didn't have tracking, on wrist, off wrist, they'd take the band off and maybe have a child or the wife, wear it. They would go, I mean, the whole point of the band is to really, for the coach or the military, the unit leader, to ensure that their team was ready for the next game. And what they were finding is, all the data looks good, but and it shows, you got enough sleep, you got 9 hours of sleep, incredibly, astonishingly, but he's hungover the next day. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? So that was kind of a neat product story. Is that's a user thing. Like, that is it's an attitudes thing. It's how you interact with the product, right? So I'm taking it off, and and then you put it on the dog collar or something, and they're running around and they're getting their exercise. The next, so this was called the Ready Band 3. The Ready Band 4 included some functionality that would address that, right? If at one moment in time your heart rate is this, and at the very next second it's 0, or well, hopefully not 0, but it switches drastically, right? then we know it is not on the same individual, right? So it becomes a persistence, and it really tells a story in itself. So that's one case where the use of the product really shaped the direction of how we were going to build the next version of it. So those are some concepts. And then the next thing to talk about is just thinking about the way technology has changed. So if you think about video rental stores that were all over the place, you know, not too long ago, really, and then all of a sudden you have Netflix that could send you the disc right, you know, they're meeting you where they are. We just had a conversation about this at work not too long ago, is how both the technology and our attitudes towards these services change, right? We had no problem going to this one store that let you rent movies to bring back home, and you watched them and rewinded them or watched the DVD, and it was more scratched than it was when you got it, and that sort of things. And then Netflix said, forget about a store, you are watching them at home, we'll send them to you, you know, we'll charge you an amount that is okay, you know, if you don't get it back to us for 3 months, you know, that's fine because we built that into the cost, you know, across the board, and then you send it back to us. All of a sudden you had this huge technology shift which let you, you know, the internet speeds, what they got to. Now I don't have to do that. You know, I can save a lot of, as a business, I can save a lot of money because I'm not losing as many DVDs, and I can just serve it up once on a server, and you can watch it whenever you want. I'll give you 24 hours and you can stream the thing, and you don't have to rewind it and all this. So that sometimes you'll make the decisions on where your product or service is going. Sometimes technology and things like the Alexa will make it for you, right? And how it interacts with things. We still have situations at home where you'll be watching a movie and the movie will have an Alexa in it. I think we've had this a couple times recently where, you know, somebody in the movie will say, Alexa, what's the weather today? And then my Alexa, you know, sounds off and starts answering the question like that. It's a whole new set of challenges, but the user experience, and that's why I bring that one up or add it, is your user experience always goes beyond the medium that you designed it for, and you have to think about that, right? So whether it's you're designing whether you're Tesla and you're designing this electric car, that's fine, it's an amazing car, but you have to think about the whole environment that's around it, and the fact that not everyone around you is driving an electric car, or once you get back home, you know, you drive it into a garage that was built in the 30s and maybe doesn't have access to you know, 220 volt plugs. So what do I do in those scenarios? Always think beyond the product or the service into the whole environment that the user is engaged in, and the distractions that they face, and their daily interactions, to make sure that it's a really good fit for them. So what that leads us to is, what do you want to do? Let me check the time because I don't have a clock. Oh, good. So because we're ambitious, it's another, you know, for some it's definitely a human trait, is this is your market and here's your product or service. What do you want to do? Do you want to take a wedge of the market, right? Like I want to take 20% of the real estate industry market with this service or product. Or do I just want to create this one product and I don't really care where it fits in? I just want to build my, you know, my thing, and I want to sell it in the marketplace. And the difference is this, right? Because this is the market, it has so many other players in it, and other people will likely have come up with the same idea or working on the same idea that you are. You really have to spend the time, not a whole lot of time because you don't have that much, is spend enough time on the front end of things designing a product that you believe will be used and will be competitive against, you know, the next person out there that has the same concept and just as easily can build it out. You know, they say, you know, it takes money to make money. You know, if they have $1 million, they can come out with it tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that it's the best one out there. And that's the beauty of the market the way it is. It's something that we ran across all the time with products and services is, yes, we have big competitors, and I as one person could never, push the product out in 2 weeks, right? It might take me 2 years. But if I put the time into really doing that user research and the experience research, I could still win, or I could get their attention to where they want to invest in my service, or they want to pull me in. So it's kind of, again, that big picture. It doesn't have to be unique, it just has to be planned out with the user in mind. So here's what I propose. Now what I propose, this is what user experience would propose, right? As far as kind of bringing it all together. Discovery and framing, which is a part of the deep dive course, and we'll go through like the sticky notes and all the different parts of this process, but it's called discovery and framing. Right? Discovery is that first part that we talked about, is really listening is capturing the voices of the users and going wide, and then coming to a point of what we call inception point is right here. When you listen to all the stories and you get all the data, and it seems, let's say this is 2 or 3 weeks into this process, you've heard a lot of things, and it's in an Excel sheet or a Trello board or paper. You get to this point, and now how do you boil it down? Right? And so now you're looking at quantifying and creating those personas we talked about, and that starts to whittle it down. We call this problem prioritization, is we really dwindle it or boil it to a point of inception. And what I call inception is, now I've done the homework, and I think I have a validated or invalidated parts of this problem that I'm trying to solve in this product that I'm trying to build, and I can go back to a stakeholder or my team and say, I've done the work, and I really think this will win because Charlie says this, and Jill says this, and this is the persona that we're targeting is this size population in the US or in the state or even in my city. We can really do some amazing things with this product or service. Framing the solution is, how am I going to build it, right? And that's kind of part of the next course that I'd like to do, but it's now we have to build the thing, right? So now we know who the user is or the customer is. Now how do I build it in such a way that addresses what I found out, right? And then this is one of the most important parts of this, is iterating, right? It used to be that you were okay figuring out a problem or a product, and then we designed it, and then that's fine. You just have the same TV for 6 years, and it's okay. What you find now is we're not in that world, because I don't know if it's shorter attention span, I don't know what it is, but you need to iterate so much faster than you ever needed to before. But the nice part is, if you planned for it up here, then you're not redesigning your whole product or service. It's small things, right? If I designed a playground and it's amazing, but I can focus on a piece of it, like this bench area, I need to iterate and make that more comfortable for the parents that are bringing their kids there, for example. Or if it's a lawn care service, like there are things that you can iterate on to keep adding value to your product or service, which keeps increasing the use or the use case. So that continued user research is really important. And one thing that gets missed often, so with that leasing application, for example, we did all the work, we built it, the development team built it out, but it's going to need continued research. Now that we have those personas, now we really want to dig into what would you use an app, if we were going to add a functionality in there, for example, that would track your, it seems like package theft is a big issue at rental places now. And so if I want to really focus and add a unique value add feature or service to renting an apartment, what might that look like? Would you log into your app and maybe see the packages that you were expecting to receive that day, for example? Would that help? And what does that look like? And so it's a small lift at that point. You're not redesigning your whole application or product. So that's that. So that is what I prepared for you guys. So now we just open it up to questions, I guess. Yeah. Thanks. Yes.
How do your customers find you, or how do you find them?
For which piece of this? For running this sort of thing? That's a good question. So user experience has reached it's pretty young, right? So in IT, for example, this was called human-computer interaction, right? And it was a 3-credit class that you took towards the end. And I mentioned this to Julie, is, you know, in computer science anyways, you take this short thing at the end is, oh yeah, by the way, the users are pretty important too. You should figure out what they want before you build something. And you're graduated.
Yeah.
Have fun. So I would say, as a business owner or as a project or product manager, you should be mindful that somebody with this skill set should be approached or part of the team. And if it's a startup, then you ensure that a member of your team has a skill set or builds a skill set that would fit this need, right? What's happening now in enterprise, there are 2 separate cases, but in enterprise, many companies have user experience groups, and they're pulled in for parts of it, like we talked about, you know, front end, you know, we brought in for 6 weeks, we had these user experience guys do this stuff, and they did the magic, and they came up with a report that says this is what we should build. It's just to be mindful that you'll need to keep them engaged, you know, at different stages. It doesn't have to be this big expensive thing, but they should be engaged in several stages of the project. As a startup, it's a little bit different, and you do want to seek out somebody with that skill set, and I think they're out there. I mean, sometimes as a freelancer, sometimes I've reached out to. So this happened last night, actually. So my wife and I just joined a gym in town, and they have a perks program. You know, every time you sign in with your wristband, you get 5 points, and if you go paperless billing, you get 100 points. So one thing I noticed from an experience standpoint is I start reading and I really should have been working on this, but it was midnight, and I'm reading through I'm reading through the perks that I could achieve by being a member. And I noticed something interesting. So we have a 1-year-old, and one of the perks that was way down the list for 8,000 points, I could get a 25-pack of childcare, 2-hour childcare, coupons, right? So I'm like, how do I achieve that? Because that'd be amazing. I could drop off my 1-year-old, we could go watch a movie or something, come back and pick him up. So then I started doing the math, like, so I have 750 points just doing those big ticket items, and those were all front loaded, right? So I signed up for paperless billing, I got 250. I signed up for the EFT withdrawals, I guess, for my monthly bill. That was another 300 points. So that's how I accrued my 750. But now I'm to the point where all these increments are 5 points each, and I'm looking at a prize it was like the Chuck E. Cheese model. I'm like, there's no way, unless I hit a jackpot of some kind, and I don't know what that looks like, that I will ever get to 8,000 points. Like, it doesn't even make sense. So I start doing, I get comical about it. I'm like, well, how many times would I have to check in a day for the 5 points to accrue to 8,000? And so I sent an email, and I tried to be pretty professional about it too, saying, I am the user, I'm a member at your gym, I love the gym. How would I ever, so this is, I don't want the pop socket, phone holder, I don't want the earbuds, I just want this 25 pack of things. But thinking about it, I'm almost, I lose interest in the perks program because there's no way I will ever achieve it. So I'm not going to log in to see how many points I've collected, because it'll be a decade before I have 6,000 points. And so I just bring that up to, as a user experience professional or freelancer, I'd like to maybe work with you, because I love the service that you're providing, but I'd like to work with you to maybe make achievable milestones that make this a better habit-forming product or service.
Mm-hmm.
right? So that at 100 check-ins, maybe I get one coupon, right? Like make it seem achievable or attainable, right? Or at 500, you know, I'm a power weightlifter at that point, and I get 5 tickets, you know, and so I'm not after something that is inattainable, that sort of thing.
How is that different from industry, you know, where I do workforce education and a different way of looking at educating to quality. I've had like 3M and different, it's like, come and speak to us. You know, we have all this product that would be the same thing, is they have all this product that if you can't use it, then what is it? You know, and you just figured it out because that's what you do.
It's trying to think about it differently.
Right, and the big companies really want the training of our kids because we don't think that way anymore. Because it has a lot to do with quality.
And sometimes you have to present
and customer finding your stakeholders. You know, thinking about stakeholders. It's not necessarily something you're gonna just because it's a great idea, like you said, and nobody uses it. You know, they've got all this inventory that nobody ever even uses. Well, that just doesn't do well for even a big company.
And that's really why this.
So they're saying train our kids differently that are coming out to work for me, and so it's a whole big concept of training and teaching and professional development.
I agree, and you can bring it into any industry, really. So that one, you know, education being a big one, or workforce.
Or workforce education,
right,
vocational education.
Sometimes you have to present, you know, if you have the idea for a service or a product that they might be able to present, sometimes you have to bring it to them, right? Or think about it differently. If you're thinking about the process of buying a house, it's actually pretty archaic. I mean, it's just the same way, you know, now we have websites that do the same thing, but it's, you know, you have this list of homes that are for sale. You have homes that are for sale and homes that you're trying to sell, and there's a marketplace, and it just so happens that it's online now instead of papers, right? You don't go to your, used to, you know, go to a realtor and they have a stack of papers and they're like, well, these ones here, and they're in the range that you're looking for. If you think about it in a completely different paradigm, you know, even cartoonishly, let's say, you know, like think about it as a store that you go to buy homes, right? Just as a concept, like as a whiteboarding concept. What would that store look like? And how would you, like you walk into the front door and this is a store that sells homes. What would that even look like? And that might help shape the app or whatever it may be that will show you how, you know, are the aisles listed by price range? You know, is that how you'd find it? So this is 100 to 200,000. That's the one I want to look for. Or they by features, kind of like you'd see at Home Depot or whatnot. You know, these are homes with with flat roofs, or these are homes with balconies, that sort of thing. It's kind of fun to do that too. If you have a concept for an idea, you just pull it in a completely different direction to see if your idea still holds up and if that would change your thinking on how you build it.
It's sort of like a microwave sometimes, and way back when we first got into microwaves, you know, some of them were like, all these gadgets and all this stuff, and you probably never use any of, you know, like, I mean, a good share of them for the price and stuff too, and try to keep the price down and still have the benefit to the majority of the customers that are going to be purchasing it.
They all work, it's the same science behind all of them, unless there's something new I don't know about behind a microwave, but some iterating might include and this example gets brought up, is the popcorn button.
Yeah.
You know, is one thing. Well, yeah, it started out as technology or a science that, you know, the science oven, and you put stuff in and you enter a time and it radiates it, and and there you have your food. And now there's a popcorn button that's sensing, because that's mostly what I guess the research found, that most people are using it to make popcorn, or heat up a frozen meal. Whatever.
But what's really confusing though is on the packages of popcorn now, it says anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes.
Right.
And it's like, well, how many minutes is it supposed to be? And that's burnt by the time after 1 minute, you know, and it's like, oh my goodness.
Obviously, the microwave should listen to the bopping.
Yeah.
There you go.
It should be a
But
microphone.
I mean, how far we've come, and yet so, you know, I mean, it's just crazy.
I have a question about pricing. So we have enough users with an experience in our service that how do you ask someone, what was the most you would have paid for that? Without, you know?
Sure.
Do you just say it that way? You buy them dinner and then ask them that?
Kind of, yeah. That is one way to go about it, or you present it. So if you have a hypothesis on a price point that you want to sell it at, that's the other part of this, is when you create a prototype, and I didn't go through this too much, I can show you. If you create a prototype of the service or product, whether it's a website or whatnot, I'm not sure where this is going. Oh, here we go. It's not going to let me show my apps, but one thing we've done is, if you create a website that has pricing options or tiers, right, to your product, and I want to price this thing at $100, you plug that into the prototype that you show to this test, let's say 20 or 30 potential users, and see if that stands out. Because you'll have all your features and all the ideas and concepts, functionality that you have in there, and one of the things that you've added is the price. And if it stands out to them, well, that's that stood out to them, right? And before they click anything, one thing we've done is we had like a basic package and a pro package and the platinum package at different levels, and you're asking them to voice, because we're not used to this. We don't normally narrate our lives. I guess it's kind of a thing with Instagram now, but if you have them running through the website and scrolling through it before they click anything, just narrate what you're thinking about. And sometimes it'll come up. Well, I'm seeing, everything looks good and this would be easy to use. Wow, that's $2.99. I guess I wouldn't pay that. It might come up. Across 30 interviews, usability interviews, you'd call them, it might come up. And if it doesn't, then you might make a point to ask about it towards the end. Like, just, by the way, before you take off, any last thoughts on this product? And I had a question about the price. Does that price make sense to you? Would you pay this much? And that works too.
So would you recommend going into your past client base, or would you go into a non-biased people?
Mix it.
Okay.
If I could, yeah, it's always good to have, because they are your client base, so you do want to have that representation, but you're also trying to attract new customers, so you try to seek them out that way too.
Can we talk a little bit about service too? You're talking about product, but service, I think that's an area that's hard to find a price point, but I think with that, we have to keep in mind in product too, but is how does your product or how does your service deal with your competitor? What do you have that other people don't have? Is to really have our kids to start think like that when they're entrepreneurs, or that you can put a higher price point on, because your service, I don't just clean houses. I provide, I'm a vocational educator and extension communicator, and I make sure that you have what you need, whatever you need, so that you can be successful and be successful at the workplace and at home. Sure. So, but is to learn how to price point and really get out there and take a look at the different prices that people provide, but take a look at the service and what do people really, really want, and what are they going to get out, what are you doing better than somebody else that deserves that price.
Correct, and that's tricky.
To meet the needs of the customer and to think that way.
It's tricky with services.
I have a theory, if I just doubled my price, that more people would buy it.
Sure.
And that's, yeah, like you might get less, right, so double the price and maybe you have less potential customers, but you might get the right, the right customers based on what you validated for. It's the same with services as well. They're trickier because you have less to compare to, because services can be so specialized. And that's why I brought up the Swiss Army knife thing, is instead of to start, you can start with one specific thing that you're going to try out, right? So you keep doing whatever, whatever your business is doing for services, they have a price point, and that's fine. But you want to test out this theory with this new service that you want to add to your lineup. Separate it out like a test tube science project. Separate it out and say, hey, by the way, these are our package deals. This is this new thing that we're trying out at this price, and see and kind of float that idea on its own. Is an option.
Thank you.
And just passed around a one page. We so appreciate your feedback of the session today. And then any thoughts you have, ideas, as Ahmed has a second session in February that will be a deeper dive into the topic. If you have any specific items that you want to add in the comments, please do. All of this is shared with Ahmed and with Collider, and it's so helpful for us in planning our sessions.
So I'll get to you, Thomas.
Yep.
Yeah, good job, Ahmed. I know Ahmed from work.
Okay.
But I think most of these people are pretty new to user experience. So how would they learn more, like to level up and?
Sure.
Have any resources?
Nielsen, okay, there's a really good website that kind of serves up articles on this, Nielsen Norman Group. It's called, I think it's NIELSEN, Norman Group, or NNG. If you look up NNG space UX or user experience, it'll come up that way too. They're really about the research behind this sort of thing in a kind of an academic yet applied way. So it's a really good resource to pick at as a start, I guess, is what I would recommend.
So do you start with the end in mind as far as who the user is going to be? Is that your when you're an educator, you know, first teaching this to kids, you know, and the whole quality, you know, user experience kind of thing, finding stakeholders and stuff. Is that sort of how you think then?
Think about the story.
Think about the story.
Yep. Think about the story behind whatever it is that you're aiming to do.
Okay, like what you listed there.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And just to Julie's point, the deep dive is going into that discovery and framing process, which is
that'd be cool then.
each part of that step of discovery and then the framing have different activities that you can pick from, right? So let's say there are 20 different activities that you can pull, depending on the people in the room, because we're human. You might have a very tense, you know, set of stakeholders that you're working with, and maybe it's harder to engage them, and there's certain activities, kind of a threshold of activities that you can pull in to get their insights versus the others. So that process would be covered in that course. Yep. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I'm a little concerned about time. So.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay. All right.
Good job.
All right.